The desperation of the alien girl. On a distant planet, far away from the safety of her people, an alien girl named Lyra sat alone. Her home was a jungle of towering trees, thick vines, and mist that lingered in the air. But it was no longer the peaceful place it once was. The creatures that once roamed here were now hiding or gone, and the trees no longer seemed to stand tall and proud. Everything felt dark. The air was heavy with an unspoken danger. Lyra was used to the sounds of the jungle, but today they felt different. Every rustle in the trees made her heart race. The cries of strange birds echoed through the trees, but they sounded more like screams than songs. The wind whispered, but it carried the smell of something worse than the usual wet leaves, something colder, more menacing. It was like the planet itself was turning against her. She had been alone for days, or was it weeks? Time didn't matter much anymore. Lyra had lost count. The world around her had changed so quickly. A few months ago, she had been living a life of joy and purpose, studying with her people, learning about their ancient culture. Now she was running for her life. Everything she once knew was gone. The war started slowly, almost quietly, but it didn't take long for the destruction to spread. Her people had always been proud and strong, but even they couldn't hold back the powerful invaders who came from beyond the stars. They came in ships that blocked out the sun, with weapons Lyra had never seen before. In one swift attack, everything changed. Her village was destroyed. Her family was lost. Her world was falling apart, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. Lyra had been left behind, hidden in the jungle, alone. She had been told to wait, to survive, to live long enough to tell the story. But each day that passed made it harder to hold on to hope. Lyra crouched low, her green skin blending with the moss beneath her. Her large, dark eyes scanned the shadows, searching for any sign of movement. Her breathing was slow and steady, trying to stay as quiet as possible. She couldn't let them find her. She couldn't let them take her. They had tried before. The invaders, the ones who didn't care about her people, they had come looking for survivors, for anyone who could tell them what was left of her world. Lyra had been lucky to escape their first sweep, but that was a long time ago. Now she didn't know if anyone was still looking for her. It was like she had vanished, erased from the stars. Her stomach growled loudly, a painful reminder of how long it had been since she last ate. But food was hard to find. She had learned the hard way that the plants of this planet could be deadly, especially when she was too weak to be careful. So she ate what she could, what little she found, and hoped it would be enough to keep her alive. The loneliness was the worst part. She had been alone for so long that she had forgotten what it felt like to speak to someone. Her people had always been kind, welcoming, full of life and laughter. But now, silence surrounded her, and the days felt endless. Every noise in the jungle made her jump, her heart racing, because she couldn't tell if it was a predator or just another empty sound. She had tried to fight. She had tried to keep hope alive, to trust that someone would come for her. But with each passing day, she felt the light inside her dimming. She had given up on ever seeing her people again. She had stopped hoping that her world would ever be whole again. The idea that anyone would come to save her seemed so far out of reach now that it hurt just to think about it. Her fingers brushed against a nearby tree, its bark rough and ancient. The tree had seen countless years, stood through storms and battles, and still it was here, standing tall. Lyra had always admired its strength, but now it just reminded her of what she had lost. Her people had been strong too. They had been proud, but pride wasn't enough to stop the invaders. And now, it was just her. She closed her eyes, her heart heavy with sorrow. Was this her fate? To die alone on a distant planet, forgotten by the stars? There was no hope. No one was coming. She was just another lost soul in the vastness of the galaxy. And yet, in that moment of despair, there was a flicker. A sound, soft but distinct. It was different from the usual sounds of the jungle. It was something unfamiliar, something new. Lyra's heart skipped a beat, Was it her mind playing tricks on her? Was she so desperate for company that she imagined a noise? Or could it be? She opened her eyes and stood up slowly, her body tense with caution. There it was again, a rustling from the direction of the dense trees ahead. It was too clear to be the wind, too steady to be an animal. She felt her pulse quicken. Was it the invaders? Had they finally found her? But no, this was something different. Her body tensed, her breath caught in her throat. She didn't know what to expect, but she knew she couldn't hide forever. Someone, was coming. And for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel completely alone. The unexpected savior. Lyra stood motionless, her senses straining as the rustling grew louder. The jungle seemed to grow quieter, almost as if it were holding its breath, waiting for what was about to come. Her heart pounded in her chest, a constant thrum of panic. She wanted to run, but she couldn't, not without knowing who or what was coming toward her. The footsteps were too steady, too purposeful to be an animal. They weren't the clumsy movements of a predator, nor the erratic path of someone lost. No, this was different. The sound was deliberate, calm. Someone was walking, and they were getting closer. Lyra's body tensed. She felt as though the trees themselves were pressing in on her, their shadows turning longer and darker as the figure approached. She swallowed hard, her mind racing through all the possible dangers. It could be another group of invaders, searching for any survivors to take captive. They had taken prisoners before, using them for whatever twisted purposes they had. She couldn't afford to be caught. But what if it wasn't the invaders? What if it was someone else? Someone different. Her mind flashed to the stories her people had told about outsiders, travelers from distant stars who sometimes passed through this part of the galaxy. But no, that was just legend. No one from outside her world would ever come. It wasn't possible. The rustling stopped, and there was a long moment of silence. Lyra's breath hitched as she waited, every muscle in her body coiled and ready to spring into action. But nothing came. Then the figure emerged from the shadows. A human. Lyra's eyes widened in disbelief. A human. A species she had only heard of in passing, a race from another part of the galaxy. She had never seen one before, only read about them in ancient texts. They were supposed to be primitive, weak, and scattered across their homeworld. How could one of them be here, in the heart of this hostile jungle? He stepped forward slowly, his boots crunching softly on the undergrowth. His appearance wasn't what she expected. He wasn't large or intimidating like the invaders, nor was he covered in the heavy armor that most of her enemies wore. He was tall, but not overly muscular, with short, dark hair and eyes that seemed to be searching for something or someone. Lyra couldn't move. She could only stare at him, unsure whether she should run or wait. Her mind told her to be cautious, to flee before he could get any closer. But something in his presence held her in place, something about him that was different from the cold, heartless invaders. There was no malice in his gaze, only curiosity, confusion, and perhaps concern. He paused when he saw her. Their eyes locked, and for a fleeting moment, Lyra felt a strange calm wash over her. Her instincts screamed at her to be wary, but there was something about the way he looked at her, like he wasn't there to harm her. "Are you lost?" the human asked, his voice low and slightly raspy, as though he hadn't spoken in a long time. Lyra couldn't answer at first. She didn't know what to make of him. Was he a trick of her desperate mind? She had been alone for so long, the isolation had begun to play tricks on her senses. But this human didn't feel like a dream. He was too real, too solid. His presence sent a chill through her, not from fear, but from something deeper, something unfamiliar. The human took a cautious step forward. He wasn't threatening, but Lyra couldn't allow him to come any closer. She backed away slowly, her eyes scanning his every movement. "No, I'm not lost," she finally managed, her voice shaky, betraying her uncertainty. "I'm just alone." His brow furrowed in confusion, and for a moment he seemed to take in her words, her appearance, as if he were trying to process what he was seeing. Lyra didn't know how to explain it. How could she? She was an alien, stranded on a foreign planet, running from an endless war, and now she was facing a human who shouldn't even be here. There were no explanations that made sense. The human's expression softened, and to Lyra's surprise, he spoke again. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said, his tone gentle but firm. "I'm here to help." His words were like a breath of fresh air in the suffocating jungle. But how could he help? What did a human know of her world, of her people? What could he do to change anything? "I don't need help," Lyra said, her voice growing steadier. "I can handle myself." But even as she said it, doubt crept into her thoughts. Could she really? How many more days could she survive like this, alone in the wilderness, with nothing but her instincts to guide her? How long before the invaders found her again? How long before the last of her strength gave out? The human seemed to understand her unspoken fears. "I've been looking for you," he said, his words like a jolt to her mind. "I know what happened to your people. I know who you are." Lyra's breath caught in her throat. How could he know about her? About her people? She hadn't told anyone. No one had known she was alive, let alone looking for her. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The human hesitated, as if unsure how much to reveal. Finally, he spoke, his words carrying the weight of something important. "My name is Marcus. I'm not from this planet. I've come to find you because you're the key to saving my world." Lyra stared at him, stunned. She had heard stories about strange beings coming from other worlds, but this was beyond anything she could have imagined. The human wasn't just a traveler. He was someone on a mission, someone who needed her just as much as she needed him. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Lyra felt a flicker of hope. Could this human really be the one to help her? Could he be the answer to the questions that had haunted her since the day her world fell apart? But even as hope bloomed in her chest, a new, more troubling question arose. Why had he come all this way for her? What was it about her, a lone survivor from a broken world, that made her the key to his survival? The human's motive. Lyra stood frozen, her thoughts racing. The human, Marcus, was claiming that she was the key to saving his world. It was almost too much to process. She had been hiding for so long, fighting just to survive. And now, here was someone telling her she could make a difference. That she could somehow save a world she had never even heard of. It didn't make sense. "I don't understand," Lyra finally whispered, her voice trembling despite herself. "What do you mean, I'm the key?" Marcus seemed to hesitate, his eyes briefly flickering with uncertainty. For a moment, he seemed like he didn't know how to explain. But then, with a deep breath, he spoke again, his voice calm and steady, as though he had rehearsed this many times before. "It's a prophecy," he said. "The ancients, my people, they had a vision. A child, born of your people, would hold the power to save us, to prevent our extinction." His eyes locked onto hers, as if daring her to believe him. "You're that child, Lyra." The words hung in the air like a weight pressing down on her chest. Prophecy. Her. She barely understood the idea of prophecies. Her people had always believed in the strength of their warriors, in the power of unity, not in stories of some special chosen one. She had been nothing more than a student before all of this began, a quiet observer of history. How could she possibly be the one to save anyone? Lyra took a step back, shaking her head slowly. "You're wrong," she said, more forcefully this time. "I'm just one girl. I don't have power. I can't do anything." Marcus stepped forward, his expression softening, but there was a glint of something in his eyes. Determination. "You have powers, Lyra. You just don't know it yet, and I came here to help you unlock them." She could feel her heart rate increase, a mixture of disbelief and fear swirling inside her. Powers. What was he talking about? She had never felt anything special within her, just the dull ache of survival and the quiet desperation of one lost and alone. She had never been anything more than ordinary. "But why me?" she asked, her voice strained. "Why not someone else? Why did you come all the way here, from your world, to find me?" Marcus took a deep breath before answering. "My people have been fighting a war for years, a war we're losing, and we've tried everything. Science, technology, alliances. But nothing works. Our enemy is unstoppable, their strength beyond comprehension. We needed a solution, something beyond what our minds could come up with." He paused for a moment, as though weighing the importance of his next words. And that's when the prophecy came to light. It said that a child from your species, with your bloodline, would be able to wield a power that could level the playing field. The key to ending this war was someone like you. Someone with the power of the ancients. But it's not just about fighting. It's about saving us from extinction, from being wiped out by a force greater than we ever imagined. Lyra's mind was spinning. Her people, her world, had been destroyed by a force far stronger than they were. She knew what it was like to feel powerless in the face of overwhelming odds. But this, a prophecy, powers, how could that possibly be real? "But how am I supposed to stop them?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "What can I do?" Marcus looked at her with a mixture of urgency and compassion. "You already have the power, Lyra. It's within you. It's in your blood. Your people were never just simple creatures. They were ancient beings, with knowledge and abilities far beyond anything your enemies could understand. They harnessed the power of the stars themselves. You just need to remember. And that's why I'm here. I've spent years searching for you, hoping that I could help you awaken this power before it's too late." Lyra felt a sharp pang in her chest. She could see the sincerity in Marcus' eyes, the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. He wasn't lying. She could feel it. But that didn't make it any easier to accept. The idea of being special, of having power, felt so foreign to her, like a dream she couldn't wake from. "I don't know if I can do this," she admitted, her voice shaking with doubt. "I've already lost everything. My home, my family. I don't know how to fight. I don't even know who I am anymore." Marcus took another step toward her, his gaze unwavering. "That's exactly why you have to do this. Because there's no one else left. There's only you." For a moment, Lyra stood there, her mind racing, her thoughts tangled in confusion and fear. She had lost so much. Could she really risk everything again for something she didn't understand? But then she thought about the state of her world, about the suffering her people had endured, the darkness that had crept across her planet. Could she keep running forever? Could she let the rest of the galaxy fall to the same fate? The weight of her people's legacy pressed down on her. Her ancestors had been warriors, healers, scientists, protectors. They had once been mighty. Could she somehow carry that legacy within her, even now when all seemed lost? She looked back at Marcus, her eyes steadying as something inside her shifted. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she felt a spark of something she hadn't felt in what felt like an eternity. Hope. "I'll do it," she said, her voice stronger than before. "I'll try." Marcus nodded, a small, relieved smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "That's all I'm asking for. We'll take it one step at a time. Together." And so, for the first time since the destruction of her world, Lyra felt as if the impossible might just be within her reach. But even as hope began to grow, she couldn't shake the feeling that the hardest part was yet to come. The escape. The jungle around them seemed to close in, its dense trees and thick underbrush pressing in like a living, breathing entity. Lyra's heart pounded in her chest, her breath coming in shallow gasps. The air was thick with the scent of wet earth, and the distant sounds of predators lurking in the shadows only heightened her sense of danger. She had always been skilled at hiding, at surviving in this unforgiving landscape, but now, with Marcus by her side, everything felt different. The weight of the moment pressed heavily on her shoulders. She was no longer just a girl trying to survive. Now she was part of something bigger. The prophecy, Marcus' words, the mysterious power she was supposed to unlock. It all felt like too much. She wasn't ready. She didn't even understand how she was supposed to help him, let alone save a world she had never seen. But there was no time to doubt. Marcus had been clear. If they didn't act quickly, the invaders would find them. She glanced over at him, his face grim but determined, his dark eyes scanning the jungle as if he expected danger to strike at any moment. The human was calm, almost too calm, for someone who had no idea what it was like to be hunted by enemies that never stopped. But Lyra could see the tension in his body, the slight quiver in his hand as he gripped the strange weapon at his side. It wasn't just his life at risk anymore. He had placed all his trust in her, and now she had to do the same. "We need to move," Marcus whispered, his voice barely audible over the sounds of the jungle. "The invaders are close. We can't stay here for long." Lyra nodded, her muscles coiling with readiness. "Where do we go?" Marcus's gaze flicked to the horizon, where the sky was turning a dull purple as the twin moons of the planet began to rise. "There's a safe house, about a day's journey from here. I've mapped the way, but it won't be easy. The invaders know this area. We'll have to move fast, and we'll have to stay off the main paths." Lyra didn't hesitate. She had spent enough time in this jungle to know that every second counted. If they were going to survive, they couldn't waste time. She was quick on her feet, but she was also aware of the dangers that lurked in the shadows. The creatures of the jungle, the treacherous terrain, and the invaders, they were all threats. But the most pressing threat now was the invaders. They wouldn't stop hunting her, not until they had what they wanted. "I'll follow you," Lyra said, her voice low but firm. "Just tell me what to do." Marcus gave her a brief nod. "Stay close. Trust me. I know what I'm doing." With that, they set off, moving swiftly and silently through the dense undergrowth. Lyra was surprised by how well Marcus navigated the jungle. It wasn't a place for the untrained. The vines were thick, the underbrush tangled, and the path was never clear. But Marcus moved with surprising ease, his eyes always scanning ahead, his steps light and sure. Lyra had to admit, he was a lot more resourceful than she had first given him credit for. As they moved deeper into the jungle, Lyra couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The air seemed to grow heavier, the jungle too still, as though holding its breath. Her senses were heightened, every rustle of leaves and crack of a branch making her freeze, her heart skipping a beat. She scanned the trees, but all she could see were shadows. "Are you sure they're not following us?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Marcus didn't answer immediately, his focus unwavering as he continued to lead the way. He slowed, then turned to face her, his expression grave. "They're here," he said quietly. "I can feel it. They have trackers. We'll need to double back." Lyra felt a surge of panic. How had they found them so quickly? They had only been on the move for an hour, and yet it felt like the jungle itself was closing in around them, suffocating them with its secrets. "Double back," she repeated, confusion flickering in her eyes. "We'll be walking straight into them." Marcus shook his head. "Not if we do it right. We'll use the trees. The trackers can't follow us if we stay off the ground." Without waiting for a response, he moved toward a large tree, its gnarled roots stretching out like fingers. He jumped effortlessly onto a low branch, and Lyra followed, her heart racing in her chest. The tree's bark was rough under her fingers as she climbed, her feet finding footholds in the dense foliage. Once they were high enough, Marcus motioned for her to stop. The branches above them swayed gently in the wind, providing just enough cover to hide them from sight. They waited in silence, the only sound the rustle of leaves as the wind passed through the trees. Lyra's breath came in shallow gasps as she strained to listen. She could hear the distant hum of machinery, the unmistakable sound of the invaders' ships flying overhead. They were close, closer than she had expected. "Stay still," Marcus whispered, his voice barely audible over the noise of the jungle. "They'll pass us soon." Lyra nodded, trying to steady her breathing. She could feel the tension in her muscles, the weight of the situation pressing down on her. It was like a game of cat and mouse, and they were the prey. Minutes passed, though it felt like hours. The humming grew louder, then faded as the invaders' ships moved on. Marcus waited for a few moments longer before signaling to Lyra. "Okay," he said, his voice calm again. "They've moved on. Let's go." The two of them descended the tree carefully, moving with quiet precision. Every step was calculated, every sound was measured. They moved like shadows, blending into the darkness of the jungle, relying on their instincts and the hope that the invaders hadn't caught their scent. As they continued their journey through the jungle, Lyra couldn't help but feel a mix of dread and determination. She had been running from the invaders for so long, but now, with Marcus beside her, she felt something else, a flicker of hope. She wasn't alone anymore. And maybe, just maybe, she had a chance to fight back. But she knew that this was just the beginning. The path ahead would be long, dangerous, and uncertain. But for the first time in what felt like an eternity, Lyra was ready to face whatever came next. The hidden truth. Lyra's muscles were sore from the constant motion, her body growing accustomed to the rhythm of survival, but the weight of Marcus' words hung heavy on her heart. The prophecy, the hidden powers she was supposed to wield. It all seemed like a dream she could never grasp. She had survived by instinct alone, relying on her ability to adapt to the dangers of the jungle. But the idea of having a destiny, of being the key to someone's survival, that was harder to swallow than any hardship she had faced. The sun was setting, casting the jungle in eerie twilight. The thick trees created long, twisted shadows, and the distant calls of strange creatures filled the air. Lyra's eyes darted to every rustling leaf, her hand resting instinctively on the knife she had taken from one of the invaders' fallen soldiers. It wasn't much, but it had kept her alive. Now, though, she didn't feel quite so alone. Marcus had stayed by her side through every step of the journey, leading her with a quiet confidence that she hadn't expected from a human. But there was still something about him that didn't sit right with her. They had arrived at a small clearing, a hidden area Marcus claimed was safe, though Lyra had learned not to trust appearances. She sat on a large rock, her back against a thick tree trunk, her mind racing. The firelight flickered in the distance, casting warm, golden hues that contrasted sharply with the dark forest around them. Marcus was crouched near the fire, his hands busy with something she couldn't quite see. She watched him, trying to understand what he wasn't saying. He was different from the invaders, but he wasn't completely transparent either. There was a guarded look in his eyes, a hint of something he wasn't ready to share. After a few moments, he stood and walked over to where Lyra sat. His face was more serious than before, his brow furrowed as if trying to decide how much more to reveal. He had been avoiding her gaze ever since they had stopped for a rest, and she couldn't help but wonder why. "There's more to the story, Lyra," Marcus began, his voice low, almost apologetic. "More than I can explain right now, but you deserve to know the truth." Lyra's heart skipped a beat. She knew he was holding something back, something important. The way he spoke, the hesitation in his eyes. It was like he was preparing to tell her something she wasn't ready to hear. "What do you mean, more?" Lyra asked, her voice tight with curiosity and a growing sense of dread. She had already learned that there was so much more to this situation than she could understand. And now, it seemed, she was about to learn just how deep the mystery went. Marcus sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. He seemed to gather his thoughts before he spoke again, his eyes meeting hers. "The truth is, I didn't just come here to find you because of some prophecy," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I came here because you're not just any survivor. You're something more. You're not only the last of your people, Lyra. You're the last of a bloodline with abilities the invaders are desperately trying to control." Lyra felt the ground shift beneath her. abilities. Her people had never spoken of powers like that. They were warriors, healers, and thinkers, but nothing that could explain this. I don't understand, she stammered, shaking her head. What do you mean? I'm just a girl. I've never been anything more. Marcus stepped closer, lowering his voice even further, as though he were afraid the trees themselves would hear him. Your people, the ones who built this planet, were more than just a civilization. They were the keepers of an ancient energy, a force that could bend the very fabric of reality. And you have that energy inside you, Lyra. I can see it in your eyes, in the way you move, in the way you survive. Lyra's mind was reeling. She couldn't wrap her head around it. She had always been taught that her people were normal, that their strength came from unity and tradition, not from some mystical power. But why me? She asked, her voice trembling. Why am I the one with these abilities? Why didn't anyone else survive? Why is this happening to me? Marcus's face darkened, and for the first time, Lyra saw a flash of guilt cross his features. Because they targeted your family, your parents, your bloodline, were the ones who held the key to unlocking this power. When the invaders came, they wiped out everyone who could defend it. The rest of your people, they didn't have what you have. You were hidden because the invaders didn't know about you, but the moment they realized what you were, they started hunting you. Lyra's breath caught in her throat. She had always assumed that her family had simply been caught in the chaos of the invasion. But now she realized they had been targeted. They hadn't just been casualties, they had been the invaders' true goal. Her family had been the protectors of something ancient, something dangerous. And now, Marcus's voice trailed off as he looked away, his face clouded with sorrow. Now they'll stop at nothing to get to you. They'll come for you, Lyra. And if they get what they want, your bloodline will be erased forever. No one will stop them. Lyra's mind was spinning. She could feel her heart racing, the weight of everything she had just learned crashing over her like a wave. Her family, her world, had it all been for nothing? What kind of power was she supposed to have? And why was she the one chosen to bear it? She hadn't asked for this. She didn't even know if she could handle it. But I don't know how to use this power, Lyra said, her voice shaking. What if I can't do it? What if I fail? Marcus's expression softened, and he knelt beside her, his hand gently resting on her shoulder. You don't have to do it alone, he said. We'll figure it out together. I'll help you, Lyra. You have more strength than you know. It's time to wake up and embrace who you really are. Lyra closed her eyes, trying to take in everything he had said. She wasn't just a survivor anymore. She wasn't just a girl hiding in the jungle, alone. She had a responsibility, a duty that she had never asked for. But maybe this was her chance to finally stop running. I'm ready, she whispered, the words heavy but full of resolve. I'll do whatever it takes. Marcus gave her a small, reassuring smile. That's the spirit. We'll take it one step at a time. And as the fire crackled in the quiet night, Lyra felt the first stirrings of something deep inside her. She didn't know what the future held, or what these powers were that Marcus spoke of, but for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel so alone. The final battle. The night was silent as the last embers of their campfire burned low, casting fleeting shadows on the jungle floor. Lyra's mind was still whirling with the revelations from earlier. She had always considered herself just another survivor, one of the last of her people, running from the past. But now she was something more. And the truth had settled uneasily within her like an enormous weight. There was a power inside her, an ancient force that could change everything. But she had no idea how to control it. Marcus had given her little more than words of encouragement, but no answers. He didn't know how to unlock her power, only that it was there, buried deep within. The invaders were closing in, their forces relentless, their technology far beyond anything she had ever imagined. They would stop at nothing to capture her, her bloodline, her people's legacy. And if they succeeded, The power inside her might be lost forever. They were getting closer. She could feel it. The hum of enemy ships had become a constant in the distance, their searchlights sweeping across the jungle with growing intensity. The safe house Marcus had promised her was only a few miles away now, but they couldn't afford to waste any more time. They needed to act, soon. "We can't hide forever," Lyra said quietly, standing up from her spot by the fire. She could feel the tremor of urgency in her voice, but it wasn't just fear. It was something else, something deeper. "We have to face them, don't we?" Marcus didn't answer right away. He stood beside her, his back straight, his gaze scanning the jungle. His eyes flickered toward her, a mix of admiration and sorrow in his gaze. "We do, but it's not going to be easy, Lyra. They're not just after you. They want the power inside you. And they'll use everything they have to take it." The realization hit Lyra like a punch to the chest. She wasn't just fighting for her survival anymore. She was fighting to protect the very thing that could change the course of the galaxy. She was the key to something greater. But how could someone like her, someone who had never been trained for battle, possibly stand a chance? "We have to try," she said, her voice stronger now. "I can't let them destroy everything. Not my people. Not what they fought for." Marcus nodded, his expression serious. "I'll help you, but you have to trust me. When the time comes, you have to unlock that power inside you. It's the only way." Lyra looked at him, her eyes filled with uncertainty, but also determination. "What if I fail?" "You won't," Marcus said, his voice unwavering. "You're stronger than you think." They didn't have much time. The invaders' ships were getting closer, their searchlights probing the trees, their shadows creeping over the ground. The moment had come. Lyra could hear the faint hum of engines in the distance, growing louder by the second. They had to move. "Stay low," Marcus instructed. "We'll make our way to the clearing ahead. I'll cover you." Lyra nodded, her breath steadying, as she followed him into the dense underbrush, her feet making little sound on the jungle floor. The shadows swallowed them whole as they moved, disappearing into the thick foliage. She could feel the weight of the situation pressing in on her, the tension hanging thick in the air, but she didn't have time to be afraid anymore. As they approached the clearing, the hairs on the back of Lyra's neck stood up. Something was off. The air was too still, too quiet. She could feel the presence of something, someone, watching them. It wasn't just the invaders. This felt different. This felt personal. Without warning, a loud crash rang out from behind them. Lyra spun around just in time to see the figures emerging from the jungle, dark silhouettes against the dimming sky. They were surrounded. "Stay close," Marcus whispered urgently, pulling out a strange device from his belt. It hummed to life, projecting a low shield of energy around them. But Lyra could see it flickering, unstable. It wouldn't last long against the invaders' weapons. "We don't have much time," Marcus said, his eyes locked onto the approaching figures. "They found us." Lyra's heart raced as she realized the truth. They were outnumbered. The invaders had tracked them here, and they had no intention of letting them escape. But this was it. There was no more running. She closed her eyes for a brief moment, focusing on the words Marcus had spoken to her. "Trust me." The power inside her was a force she didn't fully understand, a legacy she had never asked for. But now, it was all she had. If she didn't use it now, they would both be lost. Her bloodline had once been strong, capable of things no one else could comprehend. She had to trust that it was still within her. "Marcus," Lyra said, her voice barely a whisper, "I'm ready." He looked at her, his face filled with both fear and hope. "Do it." Lyra took a deep breath and reached for that power within her. It was like feeling the pulse of the planet itself beneath her feet, a deep, resonating hum that she had never noticed before, but now it thrummed through her veins, making her feel alive in ways she couldn't explain. She felt the ancient energy flood her senses, each pulse growing stronger, sharper. And then she released it. A brilliant light exploded from her chest, illuminating the entire clearing in a blinding flash. The invaders froze for a split second, their weapons trembling in their hands, as if the very air around them had shifted. Lyra felt the energy spiral out of her control, but it wasn't fear that held her now. It was clarity. She was no longer just Lyra, the girl hiding in the jungle. She was the last of her people, the guardian of an ancient power, and this was her moment. The ground beneath her feet cracked open, the very earth shaking with the force of her power. The invaders cried out in shock as the air around them became heavy, suffocating. Some stumbled, their weapons dropping to the ground, unable to bear the weight of the energy Lyra had unleashed. Marcus watched, wide-eyed, as the power flowed from her. Lyra, hold on. You're doing it. Lyra's heart raced as she focused on the invaders, using the force she had just discovered to push them back. The air around her grew dense, charged with raw, unfiltered energy. She didn't know how long she could sustain it, but for the first time, she felt powerful. She could feel her people's legacy within her, coursing through her like fire. But the invaders weren't retreating. They were adapting, their technology pushing against her power. She had to finish this, now. With a cry, Lyra pushed every last ounce of strength into one final, explosive wave. The clearing erupted in a flash of light so bright it seemed to scorch the sky itself. The invaders were knocked back, their ships crashing to the ground in a fiery explosion. The jungle trembled, the shockwave ripping through the air as everything around them fell silent once more. Lyra collapsed to her knees, exhaustion flooding her body. Her heart thudded in her chest as the power slowly faded, leaving her breathless and weak. But when she looked up, she saw Marcus standing over her, his eyes wide with awe and relief. "We did it," he whispered. Lyra didn't know if the battle was truly over, but she had taken the first step toward winning it. And for the first time, she felt that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't alone in this fight. A new beginning. The jungle had fallen eerily silent, the echoes of the explosion still lingering in the air. Lyra sat on the ground, her body trembling with exhaustion, her hands covered in dirt and sweat. The raw energy that had surged through her only moments before now felt like a distant echo, leaving her body heavy and drained. It felt as though every inch of her was being pulled back to the earth, as though the weight of the power she had just unleashed was too much for her to bear. She closed her eyes for a moment, taking in the sounds of the jungle, now strangely calm, as if the land itself had paused, waiting. The air was thick with the scent of smoke and the faint rustle of leaves, but beneath it all, there was something new, something deeper. Lyra had never imagined that this moment would come. The truth about her lineage, the power she carried within her, it had all felt like a dream. But the dream had become reality. She had changed, and so had everything around her. Lyra. Marcus's voice was soft but filled with awe, pulling her back to the present. She looked up at him, his figure silhouetted against the setting sun, his face unreadable, as if he were still processing what had just happened. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The stillness was overwhelming. The jungle felt different now, quieter, more alive. The invaders were gone, their ships reduced to smoldering wreckage. They wouldn't threaten her world again. They wouldn't threaten anyone. But the victory came at a cost. Lyra could feel the strain in her body, the aftereffects of the immense power she had wielded. She had done it. She had saved them all. But now, she wasn't sure what came next. Marcus stepped toward her, kneeling down beside her with a gentle touch on her arm. His eyes, though filled with admiration, were filled with something else, something deeper, more tender. "You did it, Lyra," he said quietly. "You saved us all." Lyra's eyes met his, and for a brief moment, she felt a sense of clarity, a connection between them that hadn't been there before. She had always thought of herself as alone, but now, standing beside Marcus, she realized that perhaps she wasn't. The journey had changed them both, and in this moment, It felt as though they had both found something they hadn't known they were looking for. But the truth weighed heavily on her heart. She wasn't just a survivor anymore. She was the last of her people, the last of an ancient bloodline that had carried knowledge, wisdom, and power through the ages. She wasn't just a girl in the jungle anymore. She was the key to something greater. And that responsibility, she couldn't ignore it. "I've only just begun," Lyra murmured, her voice distant as she looked toward the horizon. The sun was setting behind the mountains, casting everything in a warm golden glow. But in the distance, she could see the faintest hint of something else, a new beginning. The jungle might be quiet now, but the galaxy was still out there, full of uncertainty and unanswered questions. Marcus followed her gaze, understanding without words. He had always known that Lyra was special. But now, more than ever, he could see the weight of what she had become, the last of her people, and the first to embrace a new destiny. "Where do we go from here?" he asked, his voice steady. Lyra took a deep breath, her shoulders straightening as she stood up, brushing the dirt from her hands. She didn't have all the answers. In fact, she had more questions now than she had ever had before. But she knew one thing for certain. This was only the beginning. "I don't know," she admitted, looking at him with a small, tired smile. "But I'm not running anymore. I can't." Marcus smiled back, his face full of respect, and something deeper, something that Lyra couldn't quite name. It didn't matter now. The future was uncertain, but she wasn't alone. "I'll be with you," he said simply, "wherever you go." And with that, Lyra felt a sense of peace she hadn't felt in a long time. There was still much to be done. The galaxy was vast, and her journey had only just begun. But for the first time, she didn't feel lost. She felt ready, ready to face whatever came next. As they turned away from the clearing, heading toward the distant horizon, Lyra knew that her fight wasn't over. The invaders were gone, but there were other dangers, other challenges ahead. She would face them. She would embrace the power within her. And with Marcus at her side, she would rebuild. Together, they would find the answers they were searching for. Together, they would make sure her people's legacy lived on. The jungle may have been silent, but the stars above were full of promise. The future was waiting, and Lyra was ready to face it head-on.